Section 24 of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Section 24. Shuffling the edges straight, she did up the papers and tied the parcel almost without looking, sitting beside him, he thought, as if all her petals were about her. She was a flowering tree, and through her branches looked out the face of a lawgiver, who had reached a sanctuary where she feared no one, not Holmes, not Bradshaw, a miracle, a triumph, the last and greatest. Staggering, he saw her mount the appalling staircase, laden with Holmes and Bradshaw, men who never weighed less than 11 stone 6, who sent their wives to court, men who made 10,000 a year and talked of proportion, who, different in their verdicts, for Holmes said one thing, Bradshaw another, yet judges they were, who mixed the vision and the sideboard, saw nothing clear, yet ruled, yet inflicted. Must, they said. Over them she triumphed. There, she said. The papers were tied up. No one should get at them. She would put them away, and, she said, nothing should separate them. She sat down beside him and called him by the name of that hawk or crow which, being malicious and a great destroyer of crops, was precisely like him. No one could separate them, she said. Then she got up to go into the bedroom to pack their things, but hearing voices downstairs and thinking that Dr. Holmes had perhaps called, ran down to prevent him coming up. Septimus could hear her talking to Holmes on the staircase. "My dear lady, I have come as a friend," Holmes was saying. "No, I will not allow you to see my husband," she said. He could see her, like a little hen with her wings spread barring his passage, but Holmes persevered. "My dear lady, allow me," Holmes said, putting her aside. Holmes was a powerfully built man. Holmes was coming upstairs. Holmes would burst open the door. Holmes would say, "In a funk, eh?" Holmes would get him. But no, not Holmes, not Bradshaw. Getting up rather unsteadily, hopping indeed from foot to foot, he considered Mrs. Filmer's nice clean bread knife with "bread" carved on the handle. Ah, but one mustn't spoil that. The gas fire? But it was too late now. Holmes was coming. Razors he might have got, but Risha, who always did that sort of thing, had packed them. There remained only the window, the large Bloomsbury lodging-house window, the tiresome, the troublesome and rather melodramatic business of opening the window and throwing himself out. It was their idea of tragedy, not his or Risha's, for she was with him. Holmes and Bradshaw liked that sort of thing. He sat on the sill. But he would wait till the very last moment. He did not want to die. Life was good, the sun hot. Only human beings. What did they want? Coming down the staircase opposite, an old man stopped and stared at him. Holmes was at the door. "I'll give it to you," he cried, and flung himself vigorously, violently down onto Mrs. Filmer's area railings. "The coward!" cried Dr. Holmes, bursting the door open. Risha ran to the window. She saw. She understood. Dr. Holmes and Mrs. Filmer collided with each other. Mrs. Filmer flapped her apron and made her hide her eyes in the bedroom. There was a great deal of running up and down stairs. Dr. Holmes came in, white as a sheet, shaking all over, with a glass in his hand. She must be brave and drink something, he said. What was it? Something sweet. For her husband was horribly mangled, would not recover consciousness, she must not see him, must be spared as much as possible, would have the inquest to go through, poor young woman. Who could have foretold it? A sudden impulse. No one was in the least to blame, he told Mrs. Filmer. And why the devil he did it, Dr. Holmes could not conceive. It seemed to her as she drank the sweet stuff that she was opening long windows, stepping out into some garden. But where? The clock was striking. 1, 2, 3. How sensible the sound was, compared with all this thumping and whispering, like Septimus himself. She was falling asleep. But the clock went on striking. 4, 5, 6. And Mrs. Filmer waving her apron, they wouldn't bring the body in here, would they? Seemed part of that garden, or a flag. She had once seen a flag slowly rippling out from a mast when she stayed with her aunt at Venice. Men killed in battle were thus saluted, and Septimus had been through the war. Of her memories, most were happy. She put on her hat and ran through cornfields. Where could it have been? Onto some hill, somewhere near the sea, for there were ships, gulls, butterflies. They sat on a cliff. In London, too, there they sat, and half dreaming came to her through the bedroom door, rain falling, whisperings, stirrings among dry corn, the caress of the sea, as it seemed to her, hollowing them in its arched shell and murmuring to her laid on shore. Strewn, she felt, like flying flowers over some tomb. "He is dead," she said, smiling at the poor old woman who guarded her with the honest light blue eyes fixed on the door. They wouldn't bring him in here, would they? But Mrs. Filmer pooh-poohed. Oh no, oh no! They were carrying him away now. Ought she not to be told? Married people ought to be together, Mrs. Filmer thought. But they must do as the doctor said. "Let her sleep," said Dr. Holmes, feeling her pulse. She saw the large outline of his body standing dark against the window. So that was Dr. Holmes. One of the triumphs of civilization, Peter Walsh thought. It is one of the triumphs of civilization, as the light high bell of the ambulance sounded. Swiftly, cleanly, the ambulance sped to the hospital, having picked up instantly, humanely, some poor devil, someone hit on the head, struck down by disease, knocked over perhaps a minute or so ago at one of these crossings, as might happen to oneself. That was civilization. It struck him coming back from the East, the efficiency, the organisation, the communal spirit of London. Every cart or carriage of its own accord drew aside to let the ambulance pass. Perhaps it was morbid, or was it not touching, rather, the respect which they showed this ambulance with its victim inside, busy men hurrying home, yet instantly bethinking them as it passed of some wife, or presumably how easily it might have been them there, stretched on a shelf with a doctor and a nurse. Ah, but thinking became morbid, sentimental. Directly one began conjuring up doctors, dead bodies, a little glow of pleasure, a sort of lust too over the visual impression warned one not to go on with that sort of thing any more. Fatal to art, fatal to friendship. True. And yet, thought Peter Walsh, as the ambulance turned the corner, though the light high bell could be heard down the next street and still farther as it crossed the Tottenham Court Road, chiming constantly, it is the privilege of loneliness. In privacy one may do as one chooses. One might weep if no one saw. It had been his undoing, this susceptibility, in Anglo-Indian society, not weeping at the right time, or laughing either. I have that in me, he thought, standing by the pillar-box, which could now dissolve in tears. Why, heaven knows. Beauty of some sort, probably, and the weight of the day, which, beginning with that visit to Clarissa, had exhausted him with its heat, its intensity, and the drip, drip of one impression after another down into that cellar where they stood, deep, dark, and no one would ever know. Partly for that reason, its secrecy, complete and inviolable, he had found life like an unknown garden, full of turns and corners, surprising, yes. Really, it took one's breath away, these moments. There, coming to him by the pillar-box opposite the British Museum, one of them, a moment in which things came together, this ambulance, and life, and death. It was as if he was sucked up to some very high roof by that rush of emotion, and the rest of him, like a white shell-sprinkled beach, left bare. It had been his undoing in Anglo-Indian society, this susceptibility. Clarissa once, going on top of an omnibus with him somewhere, Clarissa superficially at least, so easily moved, now in despair, now in the best of spirits, all a-quiver in those days, and such good company, spotting queer little scenes, names, people from the top of a bus, for they used to explore London and bring back bags full of treasures from the Caledonian Market. Clarissa had a theory in those days. They had heaps of theories, always theories, as young people have. It was to explain the feeling they had of dissatisfaction, not knowing people, not being known. For how could they know each other? You met every day, then not for 6 months or years? It was unsatisfactory, they agreed, how little one knew people. But, she said, sitting on the bus going up Shaftesbury Avenue, she felt herself everywhere, not here, here, here. And she tapped the back of the seat, but everywhere. She waved her hand going up Shaftesbury Avenue. She was all that. So that to know her, or anyone, One must seek out the people who completed them, even the places. Odd affinities she had with people she had never spoken to. Some woman in the street, some man behind a counter, even trees or barns. It ended in a transcendental theory which, with her horror of death, allowed her to believe, or say that she believed, for all her scepticism, that since our apparitions, the part of us which appears, are so momentary compared with the other, the unseen part of us, which spreads wide, the unseen might survive, be recovered somehow attached to this person or that, or even haunting certain places after death. Perhaps. Looking back over that long friendship of almost 30 years, her theory worked to this extent. Brief, broken, often painful, as their actual meetings had been, what with his absences and interruptions. This morning, for instance, in came Elizabeth, like a long-legged colt, handsome, dumb, just as he was beginning to talk to Clarissa. The effect of them on his life was immeasurable. There was a mystery about it. You were given a sharp, acute, uncomfortable grain, the actual meeting, horribly painful as often as not, yet in absence, in the most unlikely places, it would flower out, open, shed its scent, let you touch, taste, look about you, get the whole feel of it and understanding after years of lying lost. Thus she had come to him, on board ship, in the Himalayas, suggested by the oddest things. So Sally Seton, generous, enthusiastic goose, thought of him when she saw blue hydrangeas. She had influenced him more than any person he had ever known, and always in this way coming before him without his wishing it, cool, ladylike, critical, or ravishing, romantic, recalling some field or English harvest. He saw her most often in the country, not in London. One scene after another at Burton. End of section 24. Read by Hannah Dormer, London, 24th of October 2021.